Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into some seriously high-stakes legislative drama unfolding right now in Washington, D.C. We've got it all. A surprise $1 billion construction project, a massive immigration enforcement package, and an obscure but incredibly powerful referee who literally stopped the whole thing in its tracks. It's a perfect case study in how laws are actually made or, not made behind closed doors. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The $1 billion ballroom. An unexpected request.
Okay, let's look at this number. $1 billion. That is the staggering price tag we're looking at today. But get this, it's not for a fleet of fighter jets or a nationwide highway project. This $1 billion funding request was specifically designated for an expansion to the east wing of the White House. We're talking about a major new ballroom, along with some other executive mansion security upgrades. So obviously this raises a massive question, right? Why on earth was funding for a presidential event space tucked inside an immigration enforcement package? I mean, on the surface, a White House ballroom and border security have absolutely nothing to do with each other. To figure out how they got linked up, we really have to look at where this request actually came from. Well, the key thing to understand here is that this wasn't just some random architectural add-on. President Trump has actually pushed for a major East Wing ballroom for a while now. But the real catalyst for this specific urgent funding push, it came directly from the Secret Service. They requested the money right after an alleged assassination attempt that happened while the president was attending the White House Correspondents Association dinner away from the executive mansion. Because of that scary security incident, the expansion and those related security upgrades suddenly became an urgent top priority for the administration. Now, to get this passed, Republicans chose a massive $72 billion funding package for immigration and customs enforcement, money intended to fund those agencies all the way through 2029 as their legislative vehicle. They basically tried to attach the smaller, highly specific $1 billion White House funding right alongside that massive border package. Talk about a stark contrast in priorities, right? Section 2, the reconciliation workaround. Bypassing the gridlock. You see, the traditional path for passing this legislation was completely gridlocked. Democrats had blocked the funding for ICE and CBP. And the source notes this block actually happened in the wake of fatal shootings of U.S. citizens by immigration agents. So with Democrats refusing to support the funding through the normal channels, Republicans had to figure out an alternative, purely partisan path forward to fund these agencies. And, well, they decided to bring the White House ballroom funding along for the ride. That alternative path? It's called the reconciliation process. Usually, the Senate needs 60 votes to overcome a filibuster, but reconciliation is this special mechanism that allows certain budget-related bills to pass with just a simple majority. Since Republicans wouldn't need a single Democratic vote to pass the immigration funding under reconciliation, it honestly seemed like the perfect filibuster-proof vehicle to safely tuck that $1 billion ballroom into. Section 3, the Senate's nonpartisan referee, blowing the whistle. Enter Elizabeth MacDonough. She is the Senate Parliamentarian. She might be an obscure figure to some, but she is immensely powerful in Washington. Think of her as the ultimate objective arbiter, the nonpartisan referee of the Senate's rules. You can't just throw whatever you want into a reconciliation bill just to dodge the filibuster. The items have to strictly relate to the budget. Traditionally, MacDonough's go-ahead is absolutely required for any individual item passed under this partisan process. And folks, she blew the whistle. According to Democrats, MacDonough's ruling held that funding for a project as sprawling as a proposed $1 billion White House expansion is simply too broad to be included in a filibuster-proof bill. The ballroom project, she decided, totally breaks the strict rules of the reconciliation process. And this builds directly on historical precedent. The Parliamentarian is fiercely independent. Back in 2021, Democrats tried to use this exact same reconciliation process to push through a $15 minimum wage. MacDonough rejected it. Fast forward to 2026, Republicans tried to use it for the $1 billion ballroom. She rejected that too. Her rulings affect both parties equally, really underscoring her role as a strict, impartial referee. Now, you might be wondering, what happens if lawmakers just ignore her? Technically speaking, her rulings are only advisory. The Senate majority could, theoretically, vote to overturn the parliamentarian and pass the bill with a simple majority anyway. But doing that would set a precedent that could deeply weaken the legislative filibuster entirely. Historically, respect for her authority is so deeply baked into the Senate's culture that ignoring her rarely ever happens, because members of both parties have long wanted to avoid completely gutting the filibuster. Even when Democrats were furious about that minimum wage ruling in 2021, they ultimately rejected calls to overturn her. Moving on to Section 4, political fallout and next steps, how both sides reacted. The Democratic perspective here is one of absolute victory. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer framed the parliamentarians' ruling as a massive win, arguing they successfully blew up the GOP's first attempt to fund the expansion. He stated unequivocally that Americans don't want a ballroom, they don't need a ballroom, and they sure as hell shouldn't be forced to pay for one. He's vowed to keep blocking this funding.
But immediately contrast Schumer's fiery rhetoric with the Republican response. A spokesman for Senate Majority Leader John Thune pointed out that none of this is actually abnormal during a complicated budget process. Their strategy moving forward is incredibly clinical, just pure procedure. Their mantra? Redraft, refine, resubmit. It is endlessly fascinating how the exact same ruling produces two vastly different public spins.
So where does this leave the actual legislation right now? Well, the bulk of that $72 billion immigration language actually survived the ruling and remains totally intact. The parliamentarian did bar some minor provisions, like funding for Customs and Border Protection to hire and train agents, but Republicans say those sections can simply be revised and retained. However, that $1 billion for the White House Ballroom, that is firmly rejected from this specific legislative vehicle.
Which leaves us with this final, absolutely crucial thought. We've seen how both parties have historically respected the parliamentarians' rulings to protect the broader precedent of the filibuster. But as the stakes get higher and legislative gridlock deepens, can unwritten rules, like respecting a nonpartisan referee, actually survive in our current era of hyperpartisanship? It's a question that's going to define the future of how American laws are made. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning what's going on behind the scenes.